Tonight as history, we'll get to Michael Beschloss and his perspective as a presidential historian in a moment. First, the idea of presidential history and this moment in history from a president himself.
History reminds us that at every moment of economic upheaval and transformation, this nation has responded with bold action and big ideas. In the midst of civil war, we laid railroad tracks from one coast to another that spurred commerce and industry. In the wake of war and depression, the GI Bill sent a generation to college and created the largest middle class in history. And a twilight struggle for freedom led to a nation of highways, an American on the moon, and an explosion of technology that still shapes our world.
As promised, NBC News presidential historian Michael Beschloss joins us. Thanks for your time tonight, sir.
My pleasure, Keith.
Exploiting crisis, trying to transform it into opportunity. Obviously, Lincoln went for that at Gettysburg, not to compare this speech to that one. Right. FDR went for that in the only thing we have to fear speech in his inauguration. Obama clearly tried for that. Do you think he succeeded, and to what degree?
Yeah, I sure do, because, you know, what he's saying is we're spending an awful lot of money in the stimulus program, but in the course of that, we're going to do things that we might have wanted to do anyway. For instance, you know, liberating ourselves from the tyranny of Middle Eastern oil, for instance, or education or health care, that this doesn't need to be seen only in a negative way.
Did this thus elevate this speech in terms of potential for being memorable? Is this going to be a landmark speech in presidential history or just a great start?
I think it will be a landmark because he did what a great president does, and that is not only say what he's going to do at a time of crisis, but also give it a philosophical framework. He's saying this is a moment where, you know, we're not saying the era of big government is over, the era of small government is over. We're going to use as much large government as we can to get out of this situation. Plus, we're going to do things over the long term that would have been in our interest even if this crisis had not come along.
As political craft, there was a lot of talk in there of bipartisanship, and I thought that, in fact, just the politics of this, there was something of a checkmate made against the Republicans, that if you approach these crises optimistically, you do create a situation in which anybody who is opposed to you must be heavily negative, must really go for the downer element as a bait kind of towards that. Did that speech rank in terms of historical gamesmanship from one party to the other?
Very much so, and the ironic thing, and I think, you know, you're leading to this, Keith, is that who did he take that tactic from but Ronald Reagan in 1981? When Reagan was saying, you know, our best days are ahead of us, we can be a city on the hill. If you were against that, you look negative. But even more than that, you were talking a moment ago about Franklin Roosevelt in the 1930s. You know, Roosevelt gave that speech in his inaugural, "The only thing we have to fear is fear itself." Well, that was really wrong. We had a lot more to fear than fear itself, but the speech was so great it made people feel a lot better. Then when he ran for re-election, 1936, the Great Depression was a long way from being over, but people voted for Roosevelt because the Republicans, instead of saying, you know, we agree with Roosevelt, you know, the government has to get more involved in the economy, we can't go through a depression like this again, Social Security is okay, instead they say this is all terrible, we want to take you back to the days of Herbert Hoover. Had they instead said, you know, we agree with Roosevelt, but we can manage this more carefully and efficiently and revise it, they would have done a lot better than they did in 1936 was, as you know, to get 2 states against FDR.
Yeah, they don't want to trot out Alf Landon again in 2012. But
I would not recommend that as a tactic.
Let's try to contextualize this finally in terms of the history we knew going in. This is February 24th. This is Black History Month in this country. That was also American and African American history tonight.
Yes, that's exactly right. And the whole idea of people like Martin Luther King and others who fought so hard for civil rights was that one day African American history would merge with American history. And it's happened in a lot of ways, but one of the ways is that what we've seen tonight, that Americans are looking at a president who is an African American, but I think that fact was about as far from most of our minds as it could have been.
And ironically, that was the starting point of the response, again putting the Republicans in an awfully tough position to try to look other than patronizing when addressing that.
I thought that was a little off-key. I think if he had wanted to say that 2 months ago, that would have been one thing, but tonight, I think we're all thinking about something else.
Or something very brief, maybe. Well, there's a lot of ways to nitpick that speech. We'll drop it for the time being. With great thanks to Michael Beschloss. I like to think of myself as a well-informed amateur in your profession, and as ever. So, no, I've learned something again from you tonight. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, sir. Be well, Keith.
That's countdown for this, the 2,117th day since the previous president declared mission accomplished in Iraq. I'm Keith Olbermann. Good night and good luck.